My name is Bill Balaskas. I'm an artist and writer and director of research in the School of Art and Architecture of Kingston University. And there has been a slight change in our structure for this session. So we are going to have Ramon Amaro as originally advertised, but we're also going to have Farid, rakun from ruangrupa, who is going to talk in the second part of this session. So I'm delighted to be able to introduce our first speaker for this session, Ramon Amaro, who is based in the Department of Visual Cultures at Goldsmiths University of London and is a researcher in machine learning, the philosophy of mathematics, black ontologies, and philosophies of being. Amaro completed his PhD in philosophy at Goldsmiths and holds an MA in sociological research from the University of Essex and a BSc in mechanical engineering from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Ramon Amaro is a former research fellow at Het Nieuwe Institute and a visiting lecturer at the Royal Academy of Art in the Netherlands. Ramon, the stage is yours.
Maybe I can. Oh, I'm on this mic here. There we go. Thank you very much for the introduction, and also would like to thank the organizers for having me here. I've been trying to get to Nottingham Contemporary for some time now, and it's very nice to finally be here. I would like to apologize in advance. I'm fighting off a cold, so hopefully my voice will hold up throughout the whole thing. If not, then maybe we can introduce some contingency into the atmosphere. And so what I'm going to present very briefly is a part of a project that I'm working with on speculative power with Professor Ezekiel Dixon-Romaine at the University of Pennsylvania. And it's a new project we're working on and thinking about the relationship between Blackness education and data. And it's also directly related to my own research, which deals with the spatial temporal organization of Blackness as a concept and substance, and also the Black body as an individual and collective sense of being. So I'll just get into it. It is said that to imagine one's future is to build another possible world, where the outcome of events that define who or what we are, or more so, what we have become, are projected beyond that which is known. This future, what Kara Keeling describes in Queer Times, Black Futures, as a time in between, or an interruption, is a condition of both practice and thought, in which the becoming of the self is as such only inasmuch as it is a process of unbecoming, or a change that reforges us into something or someone different than what we have previously known. According to Keeling, this forging or reforging of ourselves is as effective as it is extinguishable. It is effective in the sense that it indicates a capacity for change, or what one might call a survival in the now, in response to the immediacy of a life which has been suffered and or is sufferable or yet to be suffered in the practices of the everyday. It is temporal in the sense that the relation between this self in the now and our future selves is informed by conditions not entirely of our own making, according to Keeling, yet are defined beyond the flesh by the capacity to undo the terms of survival as such. After all, as Keeling reminds us, we, as we know it, were never meant to survive. We change. We, quote, are no longer who we were or who we would have been. In other words, for the future self to emerge, the self of what is and the self of what was must be put to an end. In its demise, the self must not be content to passively observe and experience the surrounding environment. We must instead awaken to the complex interrelationships which link the various aspects of our environments, where we are motivated to explore and analyze them. It is here that Keeling argues we encounter the generative proposition that another world is possible. And here, really thinking through, I really appreciate the previous engagement of thinking about how communities on the ground in these locations are producing something within the interrelationship and within the suffering of an historical colonial makeup, and in doing so, are producing a generative atmosphere of sociality. So thank you, Professor. Keeling's proposition strikes a responsive chord in the study of our most urgent mode of sociality, that of the empirical organization of certain bodies mediated by the algorithmic. By this, I mean a social relation that is organized through the presence of data and information that has come to signify the presence of a subject as well as their general behaviors, where this subject is doubled and abstracted into something or somebody already determined and therefore thought to be empirically understood. And of course, here I'm making how distinguishing between data and information, data being the discrete point of relationship as a discrete entity, and information being the patterning of those discrete points. A growing awareness of our indebtedness to this transmutation gives rise to a sense of social responsibility within us. It also expands an appreciation and concern for those that are silenced by the continued devaluation of life, or what Franco Bifo Berardi has described as the slow cancellation of the future. How can we reclaim a future under the terms of this foreclosure? Given, what are the terms under which the proposition for a Black future can emerge? Finally, what might this mean for Black and other racialized individuals in our systems of education that find themselves in a perpetual negotiation with their own survival within the halls of the academy? According to the study conducted at Goldsmiths, University of London, my own institution, titled Insider-Outsider, The Role of Race in Shaping the Experiences of Black and Minority Ethnic Students, according to this report, although almost half of our student body identifies as Black or minority ethnic, over a quarter, 26% of them, frequently experience overt racism from white students and staff, including the use of racial slurs, as well as the questioning of their nationalities due to their skin color. The microaggressions they experience on a daily basis, according to report author Sophia Akil, put Black students at risk in an environment that has promised a commitment to equitable learning in the future, which of course goes also to the fictive commitment to safety and care within the halls of the academy. Instead, many of our students and staff experience gross neglect, misrecognition, and underrepresentation. The report is a scathing review of the failure of UK higher education to create equitable learning environments for historically marginalized students and staff, and comes just weeks following the 149-day occupation of Deptford Town Hall, Goldsmiths' main administration building, by the Goldsmiths Anti-Racist Action, or GARA, group, which ended in July after having their demands for an anti-racist action met by senior management. And this was a student-led group that emerged from a racialized incident on campus, formalized into an actual collective, and occupied the main administration building for 149 days, organized their own food, organized their own education, organized their own resources. This is in addition to research by the University and College Union, which found that BME university staff face a 9% pay gap compared to their white colleagues, rising to 14% for those that specifically identify as Black. And of course, this is not to mention the underrepresentation of Black and minority ethnic academic staff in top university positions. As a result, the everyday becomes more than an experience of learning or scholarship, which necessitates an openness to extinguish that which is thought to be known in order to open and transform ourselves into newly emergent scholars and early career researchers. To the contrary, the energies that are available to racialized bodies in higher education for the purposes of this transformation are instead allocated on the level of the individual to one of day-to-day survival. This damning reality is striking given the historical modeling of culture. While the everyday experiences of racialized individuals in higher education are indicative of a continual gap in attainment, our institutions have become increasingly more reliant on technological solutions to learning environments and achievement. New lecture recording softwares, college towels, data centers, sophisticated student tracking and surveillance systems, biometrics, and other data-driven processes are being implemented throughout the United Kingdom in hopes of improving operational efficiency while promising an elusive dream of student satisfaction. These technologies become part of the future of education, modeled on students and staff behavior. As these tools become more sophisticated, as has already been demonstrated by algorithmically driven timetabling systems and such, the institution's focus is shifted away from the dynamism of the now and into the projection of a future that is underwritten more so by the institution's own desires for survival than the survival of its staff and students. And in doing so, it constitutes the very foundation of a neoliberal expansion, which, as has been historically shown, lives in close kinship to the techno-racial imaginary. What I seek to show is that what we see today as a failure to account for the lived racialized experiences of our students and staff of difference is part of a longer, larger genealogy of the continued disruption of Black futures made operational by empirical measures and the dreamscape of an uninterrupted future of profitability and models of student satisfaction. See if that starts there. There we go. This type of preemptive modeling has precedent in the genealogy of statistics. Of course, the precursor to what we know today as eugenics. The historical cousin of also what we know today as the algorithm. For instance, in early modeling practices, agent-based models, or ABMs, most notably Thomas Schelling's models of segregation in 1969, being one of the first functional ABMs, as well as the field's most controversial, were used to simulate and predict the behavioral patterns of so-called semi-autonomous agents who may learn, adapt, or reproduce within the parameters of a predetermined set of rules specific to that environment. And it's here that I'm encouraging to take the conceptual leap of the beginnings of the illusion of self-organization by autonomous entities under a sort of meta rule set, and thinking about the architecture and structure and also the flow of dynamics of our students, including the racialized students. In Schelling's model, insights were gained through speculation on racial segregation in urban areas in North American cities. Instead of using arbitrary parameters to establish his rule set, Schelling's spatial proximity model instead used a normalized set of classifications such as sex, age, income, first language, skin color, taste, comparative advantages in geographical locations, which were assumed to be equitable relations amongst these semi-autonomous agents. The system, notwithstanding, contained a preset distribution of, and this is by no coincidence that Schelling, they've been recolored now due to the controversy, but the original model, and this is also a precursor to cellular automata, the original model had Black and white figures, autonomous figures there. But the preset distribution of Black and white agents, which were evenly distributed across a spatial grid, once their starting points and attributes were randomly established, the agents were instructed to make a decision on the optimal place to move given their relationship to their nearest neighbor and general surroundings, which Schelling classified under the parameters contentment and neighborhood. It is important to note that the Black and white agents were governed by a simple instruction. If the agent in a neighborhood with a radius of one agent is content with a 50% mix between it and the other Black and white agents adjacent to it, then the agent can remain stationary. If the agent exceeded this contentment threshold, then it was allowed to move until it reached contentment. So basically it was programmed to where the only edict that each one of, you could see sort of in motion here, maybe it stopped. You can see in motion here is their only edict is they make a decision of contentment within the environment that's called the neighborhood, and that contentment is based on the relations of those that are around it. If they are content, they can stay in the neighborhood. If they're not content, they're free to move in any other location that they want, but of course it brings in another different set of relations that are around it, and this becomes key. The results of Schelling's experiments suggested that there are thresholds of contentment which justify self-segregation in heterogeneous environments. Eventually what happens, if this were to run, eventually what will happen is all the yellow smileys segregate to one place, and then all the blues segregate to another place. For instance, so a line of agents that may be yellow, 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 blue, yellow, yellow, yellow in a neighborhood of a radius 1 will start to sort of rearrange themselves. And at first will come to a heterogeneous sociality, but then would eventually start to self-segregate. And what was found is that the individual white agents in this sense would surpass their contentment thresholds when there were too many black agents in its immediate surroundings. Alternatively, black agents would surpass their contentment threshold where there are too many white agents surrounding. And this study becomes key within social science that comes out of Chicago School and of course comes to Europe as well in thinking about how to organize both urban areas and institutions within urban areas, because we can see the consequences of a suggestion that without a cultural milieu, students, people, so on and so forth, would choose for contentment to self-segregate. So then the only mechanism then becomes is not to think about the social, political, and economic forces that impact that contentment, but just to look at the pure relationship of satisfaction. And it's here where I'm thinking through the university system of student satisfaction. And this modeling is a type of central function that we see today in machine learning processes. Of course, this is a rudimentary modeling. This modeling and statistics is a foundation for many of our machine learning processes today. And these machine learning models produce statistically based knowledges by mapping movement and the empirical relationships between particular entities in complex environments, such as cities, landscapes, and other architectures, including university environments. Models are most often trained in research settings, although recently some models are tested in actual public spaces. The type of agents may be selected at random, but they are typically prescribed depending on the research or industrial targets. Agents are not limited to single persons, objects, or entities. They can include homogeneous or heterogeneous collectives, clusters, or even environmental phenomena. Agents are represented by description and coded to conduct a number of specific actions. For instance, they may be instructed to make autonomous decisions based on logical deduction, use decision-making to reassemble practical reasoning in humans, and combine deductive and other decisional frameworks, or explicitly not use reasoning at all. These decisions can be made in either controlled environments or environments with various levels of contingency. But these types of models as such rely on a consistency as well as a stable operation. And by stable, I draw on data consultants Gordon Linoff and Michael Berry, who refer to the model's ability to successfully preempt structured training data, as well as any unstructured or unknown phenomenon it may encounter. A model's stability is informed by 3 primary edicts. First, Linoff and Berry assert that the models are most relevant in real-world situations that can affect change of some sort. And the goal of this design is not to produce the best possible model for all those involved in a control environment, but to instead remain sensitive to the environment for the aims of the design itself. Linoff and Berry argue that these models must also remain temporally sensitive, since they are influenced by the temporal relationship between input data and forecasted values. Although these models are trained on historical data, they may not be applicable for use in other time periods. And therefore they write, quote, "While it is not a requirement that the future be exactly like the past, models work on the assumption that the past is a prologue to the future." And it's here again that I question with this prologue what it might mean when the past is predicated on a racialized dynamic. The learning exercise adds relevancy to Matthew Fuller and Graham Harwood's critique of the reductive nature of data practice. And they write, "The specific categories upon and through which segregation operates are described as if natural, not even worthy of equivocation as to their relation to social structure. The racism of the work is both that it operates by means of racial demarcation as an autocatalytic ideological given, and secondly, that it provides a means of organizing racial division at a higher level of abstraction. To say that Schelling operates within an ideological racialized frame is not to avert either way as to whether Schelling as a person is consciously racist, but that in these papers, racial division is an uncontested, obvious social phenomenon that can be reduced in terms of its operation to a precise set of identifiers and operations. And it's here that I think about the response to the report through Goldsmiths, which is attempting to capture and model racialized experience, and the response thus far to the capturing and modeling of that racialized experience is to reduce that social phenomenon to a series of operations that then must be deployed depending upon the best solution, which is what has been said so far. Fuller and Harwood point to the subtlety of essentialist narratives that dislocate human accountability in the abstraction of racialized computational logics and the invention of phenomenal justifications. Even so, preemptive and profiling models are both vulnerable to error. Lenoff and Berry write that profiling is limited by its inability to distinguish between cause and effect, not to mention any common demographic variables that may be hidden within the data. Lenoff and Berry describe the example of a preemption that suggests, so far, this is one of the examples that they use in thinking about cause and effect. So they use the example suggesting that men buy more beer than women. But the model assumes that certain variables remain fixed, while other variables are in a unidirectional causality. So men drink more beer. It becomes a bit algorithmic. But instead, the alternative correlation that might suggest drinking is instead the cause of maleness does not enter into the particular type of equation. So we see two types of schematics that are currently unfolding within the university in the UK. Is the university is racist, right? And then we can break that down into subcategories, algorithmic categories about what racist actually means, devaluing of life, so on and so forth. And then to see the counter response in the relationship match the same linear causality, right? So, but it actually does not match the same linearity. What I mean is, even if we to establish a proposition that the university is racist, rarely in the discussion, and this is what they argue, enters the reverse causality, which means racism births the university, which is what we were talking about earlier. And because of this, taken unidirectionally, profiles can conflate social constructions with causality. And we've seen this mechanism unfold within our society, such as car theft is higher in neighborhoods where more young black males reside. Therefore, it is likely that young black males are car thieves. This raises questions about a reliance on the solidity of certain culturally produced phenomenon and how they inform an equally fragile causal relationship, particularly considering the absurdity of opposing directions. And the opposition would be that young black males reside in neighborhoods with high amounts of car theft, therefore it is likely that car thefts create more young black men. The logic actually doesn't. If we actually see the mathematical logics that we deploy, it becomes nonsensical. So we basically deploy a mathematical logic only to our self-satisfaction for survival. And then when the moment comes of contingency where we're faced with the opposite logic, which in mathematics works, then we disrupt the mathematics and then go to social phenomenon. So we're playing a hat trick, basically, which I think is the precursor to being in university administration. Oh my God, is this being recorded? The tensions illustrate an imbalance in institutional approaches and operational aims. They nonetheless constitute a series of human-machine relations that are fed back onto the hierarchical organization of social phenomenon. To illustrate this, I follow Adrian Mackenzie by questioning what systems are transformed when machine learning is generalized across various epistemic, economic, and institutional settings. Unlike Mackenzie, however, I question whether, in terms of the genesis of black being, epistemic capital and institutional settings, or the exclusive inscription of the categorization of being human, are instead transformed at all in relation to the violences enacted upon the racialized being, or more so, the regulation of Black spatial movements. The logics of modeling therefore force feed any variability in agent interrelation into empirical assumption that are further regressed into probable facts and assurances. The groupings of certain peoples around controlled substances, in this instance race, is troubling inasmuch as it exists as an exercise of sociogeny and prototypically devoid of indeterminacy. Historical and present cultural organizations around racial hierarchies, economic and spatial weaponizations, and the continued objectives of colonial intent. Data and the phenomenon of being, as being in relation to race, are simplified in the service of a eugenic type of determinacy, further naturalizing economic struggles for mobility, racial aggregations, and self-segregations as a logical form of pleasure, happiness, and contentment. Stuart Hall asks, do we bear our cultural identities, the signs and symbols of our belongingness, like, as some would argue, indelible number plates on our backs? Or are the unities that cultural identities appear to constitute the result of what we might call a practice of narration? So going back again, thinking about Hall and thinking about our sense of belonging being associated with discrete points of data that then become information, that then become a law of a narrative. And how this invention of the cultural self produces fixed belongingness, and rather the way that we construct, after an event, a type of pervasive, consistent biographical story about who we are and where we come from. I do not seek to suggest that an empirically driven understanding of racialized practices in higher education are in direct relation to racial segregation, or that these data determinancies arrest the potential for change. To the contrary, I argue that any attempt at an empirical model of space in the space of higher education is first and foremost already a racialized practice, and secondly, can only emerge within the potential for increased segregations and alienations unless they can account for the lived experiences of racialized individuals and collectives, as indicated in the Inside-Outside report. Unless it can account for these experiences, the effort is merely an exercise in speculation based on bodies frozen in moments of space and time, with little or no account for the extinction of what is or what once was as a necessary change for what might come to pass. I'll read that again, sorry. Without accounting for these racialized experiences, these efforts are merely an exercise in speculation based on bodies frozen in moments of space and time, with little or no account for the extinction of what is or what once was as the necessary change for what might come to pass. And here I think back to the professor's demonstration of even now today to have even an NGO or another organization enter upon a space and actually enter into a right of refusal to see the peoples in that space as something that no longer were, but that are. Yet the policies and the procedures and the philanthropy is still operating as if, without account for how that as if, by freezing those bodies within this as if under the illusion of freedom with technology, what I'm arguing is they're actually arresting the same potential that they are there to actually unfold. And in this way, there is a profound power in the act of this type of preemptive model. We might consider how this fictive substance of race and racialization might be, for some beings, the localized individuation of a power-knowledge relationship, a nuance that is too often left behind and under the terms of a universal assessment. So what are we to do with our current empirical reality, or I could say algorithmically mediated lives? How are we to disrupt the distributions of power that are amplified by data in advanced learning environments? Keeling's provocation is an important intervention as it makes apparent that the type of world making that machine learning algorithms are coded to enact are not limited to predeterminacy. returning to Keeling, while an engagement between Black and minority ethnic individuals in higher education is limited by the necessity to reconcile the survival of the self within an environment that is indifferent to any sense of survival other than its own, there is a future that can be built through appropriation of the model itself. As GERA and other student-led resistance groups have already demonstrated, that speculation itself can be arrested by altering the terms of survival itself. In recognizing that racialized experiences of students of difference had been reduced by the university to the languages of satisfaction, they effectively transformed the structure of language itself by removing any dependence on the university for its well-being and care. So in a way, what became the contingency during the GERA occupation, and by the way, it's a very colonial type of structure, which is the administration is currently still in, what was anticipated, it's Goldsmiths, so what's anticipated is an occupation. And the logics of that occupation already runs through the fabric of the university. I saw this firsthand. I was in a toilet, there were two guys in suits. It's Goldsmiths, so if you're in a suit, you're not a teacher or student. And one of the guys says, "Oh, so you guys are being occupied." And the other guy said, "Yeah." All right, it's an expected response. What was unexpected is that the students would actually co-opt the languages of care, because this university, and Goldsmiths is not the only university in this setting, is in the arresting of its own neoliberal future. It can only depend upon the abstraction of a utopia of what that future might mean: employability, satisfaction, care, well-being, and so forth. And so what the GERA students actually did was they not only physically occupied the space, they physically occupied the abstraction of what the university could offer. So they start caring for themselves. They had buckets where people were giving them food. They put on their own education programs. They started actually running a university within the university, which didn't depend upon the university because the university couldn't get into it. And by doing so, the terms of survival in that sense were rooted in actions that rendered the university incapable of doubling the languages of the status quo with the languages of equitability. In other words, as GERA demonstrated, BME students were not students in the eyes of the present university, and therefore fell outside of the speculative future of the institution. Although their abstracted bodies remained unseen, a different problematic emerged: that of their physical bodies functioning, learning, surviving on university grounds, but without university intervention. In other words, in GERA's rejection of the images of an altruistic institution, they rewrote the myth of a space of hierarchy, of hierarchical learning within the institution, reducing it to merely a space to be occupied. Space as well as time in this sense became arbitrary, and communication by power ineffective at distancing itself from that which it produces. So basically what ended up happening is GERA, of course, was documenting all of this through social media, through all different channels. And as we see with other types of resistance groups, they were documenting it in the sense of a fragmentation. So the fragmented information they were documenting were taking hold upon other resistance groups who then got into solidarity with GERA outside of the institution. And so it became nearly impossible for the administration to negotiate the terms under the rhetorics of, because they basically wrestled control of the narrative away. So as soon as they would say, okay, well, by law we can evict GERA, which has started that process, someone else would say, but they're children and evict them. Then the housing right policies came in. And then as soon as they said, well, these students, it's not within education because it's over the summer, you see all these different sort of threads of narrative. It allowed that one event breaking the logical formation of the university, allowed different strands of contingency to come in. And in this sense, this type of illusion of space, this illusion of the smiling good student of the future, of the smiling good staff of the future, was replaced by the student who could only rely on self-study, self-organization, and self-determinacy. the elusive student of satisfaction had been rendered extinct in its future and present form. What emerged was an alternative mode of being in the process of becoming that which has modeled its survival on that which exceeds the model of any external future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ramon, for this very, very rich talk and ideas. I'm very happy to introduce our next speaker, Farid Rakun, who is a member of the ruangrupa collective. He is a visiting lecturer and in the architecture department of Universitas Indonesia, and he's currently the interim director of the Jakarta Biennale. ruangrupa is a contemporary art organization founded in 2000 by a group of artists in Jakarta, and as a non-profit organization, it works to advance art ideas in urban context and the broad scope of culture through exhibitions, festivals, art laboratories, workshops, researches, and books, magazines, and online journal publications. In 2019, so this year, ruangrupa were appointed curators of Documenta 15 in Kansel in Germany.
So, yeah, ruangrupa is formed by two words. Ruang is space and rupa is visual or form. I knew them since 2003. I wasn't one of the founders, but the space part was the one I got me attracted to. And then, of course, it wasn't anything at that moment. It's just like a group of young people having a space, talking about a lot of interesting stuff, and getting drunk before we go to club. So that's how I knew them. It's not a it's not a smart career move at all. Fast forward into 2018 November, we started this. We form a collective of collectives, we call it. Not only ruangrupa, but also Serum and Grafis Suruhara. It's called Good School. It doesn't mean anything in Indonesian. It's just like, it sounds like Good School in English, but it's written in Indonesian way. And then we like the logo this much. It's a bad logo. We love bad logos. But we love it because it can also be read as good looks or looks good. So that's why we like it, basically. And then it's a school for collective study and ecosystem building, basically. Disclaimer, most of us, at least the founders, didn't actually graduate, so we're dropouts, a lot of us. And then making a school is actually not a reactionary move, to be honest. It's like we're not criticizing the system that has failed, or we failed, actually. It doesn't fail us. We failed them. But it's like something else can be done, basically. We just like university, all those kind of stuff, art schools, let them be. But we know we have something to offer, something different, and it is basically what we've trained ourselves to do since 2000. It's basically collective building and collective thinking, and ecosystem in this way is just like not only environment, but also like how to sustain each other, how to sustain our practice and ideas. Because to begin with, those are the ideas we establish ourselves, because the ideas and the stuff that we wanted to talk about was just like, there's no space for it. That's why space is part of it. And then it's also a way to actually challenge the way school thinks it's not only individual. So it's not for individual gain, but by thinking across systemically, if I move forward, basically, I'm going to help also people that know me, friends. But it can be called nepotism. But It's part of the game. This is when we moved, we started in 2018 November. We moved to this building in, I think, August or July, so it needed to be fast. It was a mini football field, so it has a roof already, but it was a football field inside. We bought it, but actually, I can come to that story, but later, because I don't have that much time, how a collective can buy property. So yeah, it was a mini football field, and then that makes sense when it's just like, this is the academic team. It's like a football team. Each of these people were actually what we call coordinators of certain subjects, from art history, curatorial, spatial practice, which is basically architecture, a bit of architecture, ethic, politics and aesthetics, all those kind of stuff, but through a very specific lens of collectivity or collective, like how to curate collectively, how to see the history of art that's done collectively in Indonesia and then Southeast Asia and then maybe the world. But it's basically, that's what we know. We cannot replace or say that we know certain things, which is basically, we just complete the other stories basically that's been told. What we do is actually not teach, to be honest. We call ours the program participants. It's a year program, non-degree granting, of course. We don't want to go to that. But we ask them, the participants up until now, this is the second batch already, like around 15 people, ranging from age 18 up until 40 something. We ask them to basically form a collective, at least for a year, and hang out with us. That's why we kind of like, the hanging out is the most important part, but also like what they want to do and see us as a resource. So how can we help? Although each of us have certain skills and histories and biographies, of course, but we actually don't know better than them. So we basically become a support. And then space, time, knowledge, money sometimes, not that much. But also, yeah, network is very important. Like, just use those stuff that we have for them for a year, and then hopefully we can build a certain network. And then, yeah, in the end of the thing, this kind of stuff happened. It's public presentation. It's not only that, but like some people made restaurants, some people, not only exhibitions, basically. But then I want to show you this architecturally. Of course, we got imported as well as a practice. This is in Korea, in Seoul, where a museum asked Good School to stage something, and then we built our own architecture, of course, which I will show you in a bit. But it's kind of like different when we practice it in an architecture that's not our own. No, what's wrong? Okay. What happened? Okay. So yeah, in certain. Okay. Yeah, in certain architecture is violence, no? Basically, and then it's for certain bodies to act a certain way. So this is a market, knowledge market, which is basically like in a very short form of it. I practice it kind of. I shared it in this morning workshop, but we were doing it in this kind of architecture, also in the middle of something we called like free exchange market. So it's just like artists giving away stuff. That's what we stage. But then that yellow things were there to begin with. So we basically needed to hack it. This is Gwangju Biennial, also the last one. Good School needs to stage something, but this is an official picture from them. It's basically like an architecture photography. There's no people. which for us it doesn't make sense. This is Sarjah Biennial, the last one as well, which we kind of like play with knowledge. So we're still experimenting with this because like ruangrupa has a certain kind of aesthetics, Serum as well, Grafis Suruhara as well, but as good school, it's not there yet, to be honest. So we're figuring things out that way. Architecture in good school, hopefully display. This is Jakarta Biennial 2017. It was built with a certain kind of, like we built panels, all those kind of stuff. I think volume can be down a little bit more. So we built an ex-warehouse to kind of like to be suitable for certain kind of contemporary art exhibition. And then why we're showing this, why Ruyan is here. Ruyan was part of this this edition of Jakarta Biennial. So you can see these panels and stuff that we built for it. And then you'll see the connection to actually to the architecture of good school itself. But this is the warehouse. This is Jakarta Biennial 2015, when we just found that warehouse actually. It wasn't built the same way. It's much more raw, let's say. But it was 2015. It was empty. We moved a lot of even water, electricity, all those kind of stuff we installed. And then this is when, after this, that's when the collective of collectives we started to practice. We basically occupied this newfound space. It was a surprise, but then it became this in 2015. Yeah, between 2016 to 2018, this is our space, the collective of collectives, 6,000 square meters. We built the interior of this thing with the stuff that we used to construct the Jakarta Biennial, basically. And also, to be clear, Jakarta Biennial is not ruangrupa project or the collective project. It has a different history. We just hacked the institution in order for us to learn about something else. To make a big scale exhibition is one, to practice international exhibition making is two. So we just basically use it. But then architecturally, it's also like in Jakarta, a lot of people have this kind of sensibilities of using what's there already, because as a lot of states which have been talked about before, it's a failed state, which is I'm thankful for. So it's not, there's no mainstream, we're never alternative that way. So we can just like topple it a little bit and then use it for our own use. And then it's useful that way. So yeah, this kind of stuff we kept on building and all those kind of, and use certain things for our own benefit. And then architecturally, I think it shows. And then you can see it, I come back again. That was the warehouse. This has become good school right now. So we bought the space. We need to move there for a very short time. And then as you saw, there were a lot of containers. We need to move anyway. So we had a roof already. So in a very short time, we didn't have any drawing for this. We just like moved the containers in with the roof. So the upside of it is just like we don't need to ask for building permit. And it could also be very fast. So we just moved in and then built our school. There is no, it's almost like a general feeling of spaces, and then up until now, it's still ongoing process of building. It's used like this. it's used like this also, we subrent all those kind of stuff. But because of certain feasibility, actually the government is interested to help us. And then they're trying to draw the drawings for us, no? This is their translation of our architecture, which we let them do as well. We're going to hack it anyway after they pay for it, for like renovate, let's say, renovate and this is for studios, these are for classes, all those kind of stuff. We're going to do something with it later. Yeah, this kind of stuff is funny. Architectural rendering. What I'm actually wondering is like, how can architectural historians read our architecture in the future? Because it's almost like to do autobiography. It almost doesn't make sense. But I'm curious when art historians, because we're in the visual art most of the time, and architectural historian read us. Maybe it's kind of funny. And I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you very, very much.
First of all, Ramon, I was very fascinating to hear your take on the current status of British academia, because a lot of the things that you've mentioned are things that we're actually discussing in the corridors of our institutions on an everyday basis and thinking, what could we do? And I couldn't fail to think about one of the arguments made by Sylvia Wynter about the Enlightenment and how the narratives of the Enlightenment brought religion down, and then religion was replaced by race as a way of creating a narrative of naturality or inevitability when it comes to how things are working. So I was wondering, on a very, if you like, practical level, how do we avoid those inevitabilities within our classrooms, actually? How do you deal with those issues as an educator?
I mean, I think that, I guess it's interesting to think through Winter with this, because I think in a way Winter already gives us, by sort of doing this exegesis of humanism and the Enlightenment, she sort of gives us the solution to it either. And thinking about, in that dismantling of the divine, and then replacing that divine, of course, with, the white heterosexual male, and then, of course, the dismantling of the white heterosexual male, Winter is going back to the necessity, not necessarily for the symbol, but for the ceremony of the symbol. That's what she's saying, the ceremony must be found. And when I think about that within a university context, it's these types of preemptive models, both of staff organization, lecture organization, spatial organization. It's all for some type of ceremony, which they can only articulate in terms of employment. Like, I'm going to have this happy, as Lewis Gordon would say, prototypical student that's going to leave with the absolute best satisfaction, and then is going to be employed, make $1 gazillion, and then is going to drive back in their Bentley and give it all back to Gold's Rain. It's a very crude model of an American university model. So, but the difference is the ceremony for the American university has already been within capitalism. And the problem, the crises, as I see it with the UK university, is this refusal to actually be transparent about what the ceremony actually is. And the only way that it can be illustrated is through this type of fictive model. But I think given that, really one of the lessons I learned in seeing this Guerra model and its other types of models is really grounding this sort of abstract idea that power can only speak in the languages of its own survival, and becomes inept at speaking anything outside of those logics. And it's there in which I see forms of resistance. So each time the university came with a narrative, we care about you students, then the Guerra students would say, but you blocked the fire exits. You can't care about someone you won't let it, and then they're like, oh no, unblock the fire exits, right? And it was a reactive thing. I spent some time in Hong Kong over the summer, and I could see some of the elements also in resistance that's there. There's a logics of resistance there that even the government entities cannot hold on to, so they can only speak in their own languages, which are counter to their own operational types of strategies. So bringing that back to the university, I think in a way is I'm actually happy with Power having a ceremony. I guess it's similar to what you're saying. Is like, I'm okay with them renovating the space. Because in their perpetuation of those logics are moments of blindness and their own refusal to actually recognize contingency, that I think contingency can live and brew and continue to intervene in spaces that it cannot see. So in a way, I think it's kind of already happening. I think that the more that we can encourage our staff, our students, and other administrators to actually see these logics of power and how they operate in the languages of power, I think the more, speaking of agent-based modeling, the more determinacy people might feel that they have within those types of spaces. And who knows, maybe we'll hack a classroom and turn it into something else. I love to do that.
You should, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a start.
Thank you. And moving to Farid, moving forward with this concept of agency and what actually happens when you are bringing together people in a different kind of context. You mentioned, Farid, that hanging out is the most important part, and
Hiding out? What?
hanging out. So bringing people together. So
Hanging out, okay, yeah.
I was wondering, how have you seen this process of hanging out changing ever since you've you now have a permanent building of your own permanent basis? So how this new structure, this new architecture, has affected your thinking around how you bring people together?
Well, we started with like in-house rented houses, no? And then converted a lot of Indonesian collectives, not only us, started out with like rented houses, just like renting it as like a family, and then we turn it into something that's more public. It cannot be very public, but it's just more public than residence. So we used to have that kind of living room sensibility anyway. When we moved to the warehouse, it was super difficult because it was not for human, the scale, it was for whatever, boxes. But then when we could build our space almost from scratch again, it's kind of like easier because that human scale can be introduced again, and then hanging out is like I think continuing from you with the American way of thinking as well, like as if time is money. Like with hanging out, it's basically like time is totally not money because you need to waste it. You just need to waste it on each other with no productivity in mind, And then again, of course, we're in the UK right now. We can say just like we can use even watching football together, watching concerts together, all those kind of stuff. It's like it's a part of it, and then we use it as well. Although a lot of times it's not consciously, deliberately, theoretically, but we know we based or we develop our sensibility through those popular things. So people want to hang out with us all the time, Like I was one of the victims, basically, from the beginning. No, yeah, that's why we stress out the importance of hanging out.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for a couple of questions from the audience. So please feel free to ask our members of the panel.
Manchester School of Art. Thank you for both your presentations or even performances, because I was going to say the performative is what I'm really interested in. You're both investigating more, in the sense that I think for both of you, the way it's described, it's a performative act, and there are spaces and times that these things happen. So the question is, for how long can this status or stasis almost? So, I mean, it would really be really good if speaker one, sorry, him gone from me, could sort of, I guess, almost do an analysis. The GERA action lasted for 100 and something days. Do you think that generally there is that kind of time span, or is it something that could continue? I mean, the continuous and the continuum, I think. And then in your case, I think the issue about, particularly for very specific things like a biennale and so on, is there this peak point and then, you know, at a certain point it clearly reaches its largest audience, then what happens? Is the afterwards, or is it cyclic?
I mean, I think in terms of temporality, I think it's the, I guess specifically, and whether the GERA action can be something that is durable, I think lies in the moment of potential of the event itself. And what I mean by that, I guess that's why I'm interested in different type of logics that intersect at certain points, and why I brought in the antidote of the two administrators, because what it revealed to me is that the logics of resistance had already been subsumed into the contingency plan of the university. So the university already preempted GERA. What they did not preempt was the success of GERA. And because GERA was successful, it preempted other campaigns on campus that now know that the potential to occupy, because that building was a tap card, like Kehinde was saying, you couldn't get in it, right? Which emerged another potentiality about what spaces on the university are now available to resist, which of course administration is responding. So basically the event itself opened up new languages and logics. And for me, that's far more important than saying just that strand of GERA is going to continue, because in the neoliberal turn, is what I'm thinking through, is in the neoliberal turn of education in itself, it created almost this airtight model of what the university is supposed to be, how staff is supposed to behave, how students are supposed to behave, and in their failure to actually, so basically they I guess to use that expression, shot themselves in the foot because they attached their survival to the ideology. And because they've attached their survival to the ideology, they must enact the ceremony of the ideology while it's unraveling. So basically the rope is burning at this end, and they're coming to this end. And I think that the durability is actually in the explosion of it all, because the only thing that's going to be left are these students who, under the terms of their own marginalization and survival, continue to show up because they continue to see a future which is yet to come. And that's not attached to the same logics that the university sees a future for. So my suspicion is that that whole place could burn to the ground and these students would still set up a classroom. So that's so I'm trying to work with these different type of temporalities.
And for me, it's like, yeah, thank you for bringing it up, because what I realized, at least today, I wish I was there as well yesterday, so I had more full picture of this gathering right now. But there are a lot of you guys, at least from today, it's just like working in the institution of university from the inside and trying to do something with it, no? For us, of course, institution is still important because it gives you certain access, no? Like, for example, a biennial, which is not ours, but we took it for a while. We're giving it away right now. I'm no longer the interim director because we found a new director of the biennial, which is amazing. But we use it not only for I think the ecosystemically thinking is like we use it to learn. Our friends who are basically like the art handlers, they were not used to build a certain type of exhibitions in Jakarta. By introducing certain types of a biennial, they're learning with us. So it's an experience of doing it. curators, let alone as well, like it's a new species for our ecosystem, for better or worse. But they learn how to deal with certain kind of spotlight, responsibility, exhibition making, all those kind of stuff through making it since 2009. We learn through it. And then coming back to institution, I think for up until a certain point, institution is useful. And then after a while, you got suffocated by it, no? There's a certain risk of it. And then maybe it's time to just like let go after that, like it doesn't give you certain kind of oxygen anymore. So so that which is this is why I learned a lot today, because there's still a belief, because clearly your state is working, which is not the case with our state, So you can, it is your right to fight for what the institutions that has been built. Then you want to change it from within. We just don't have that hope. Just like institution is institution, we can build our own, basically,
Yeah. And I think just a quick comment on back to the temporality. I think it's why I'm starting to think through this idea of extinction of the self as well, because the prior, the collective action that we had, I think it was 2 years ago, it was under the logics of equitable pay, equitable pension, so on and so forth, and then came the logics of the speech telling the students why we're doing this, and then of course these very rote things about, but take this time to learn on your own, all that sort of stuff, and what happened actually is a group of students in our department, led by a group of students from another department who were experiencing racialized experiences, so came to our department, and they started a group called the Forum. And this group actually started to put on programming on campus, to the point where they partnered with the National Maritime Museum, and they were actually allowed to redo the slavery exhibition how they envision it. So they changed the documentation, they covered up all the colonial figures, and then they invited the public to actually experience the space as if it was something else. And from that project, I was actually just approached by one of them last week, is now they actually are asking me how to design a curriculum. So they're up to something, right? And it's so the extinction of the self was actually realizing that what appeared to be a space of inequitable power actually was always within their capability, which was in the logics of the university itself. They told you had all the power. And now they see it. And now they're making use of it. And then I'm hoping they, one day will probably help me out, because now I'm a commodity to help them. But those are the types of extinctions and temporalities and how they catalyze other types of experiences I find to be very interesting.
Thank you. I think we might have time for a last question. Yeah. Yeah, back there, I think.
Hello. Thank you again for those two really good presentations. My question is for Ramon. You're talking about computational frameworks, which is not my field of expertise, and my lingo here won't be right. But it struck me that the very structure of it is very binary, right? There's white and it's black. And now, like, you're looking at the examples of Hong Kong, where there's a kind of decentralized popping up of different movements, and partially that's why they've managed to sustain the protest beyond, like, the initial umbrella movement, which had sort of clearer leadership and so on. So I just wondered whether how that is going to be fed back into the work of computational analysis, because I think the language of that becomes the logic of how power continues to be, reinstated, because it assumes a neutrality and a universality. Yeah, and I just wonder how that is going to be dismantled.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's usually the point that I never get to when I present, because it takes too much time. So basically, essentially what I'm looking at are nonlinear articulations of computational systems which already live within two spaces of a binary logic as well as a purely contingent logic. I think it's why Denise da Silva's in quantum physics, to look at the possibility of both in two spaces. And the reason why I do that is actually what's happening in Hong Kong is not that a contingent process is performing in a non-binary. They're two sides of one coin in a relationship. The government is acting as a binary, which is dependent upon, because its only survival is to be a binary for contingency. The problem they're having now is the contingency sees that it's the other side of the coin. Because what was apparent in Hong Kong is that this resistance could be crushed in a moment. The protests weren't scary. What was scary were the tanks at Shenzhen that are waiting. They could crush it in a moment if they wanted to, but they can't because it would usurp their entire binary logic of power. So basically their survival depends upon the survival of the contingency, which is what we knew in computation already with Shannon. In order to have the algorithmic process, it already depends upon the contingency and the feedback. What Silicon Valley has done is convinced us that that contingency didn't exist. It was always a fiction, because that's what they do all day. So it's not that I'm reinforcing the logics of a binary. What I'm trying to illustrate is first establishing what the language of the binary is, and of course then the second half of the project is seeing then how this non-representational mechanism unfolds on top of it. But I don't think you want to listen to me for like hours to get to there, right? Yeah. No.
Thank you very much. So on that note, please join me in thanking our two speakers, Farid and Ramon Amaro.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.